Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us at the School of Business and Management Virtual Undergraduate Open Day. My name is Shauna, and I'm delighted to be welcoming you all today. I'm joined by Dr. Darren Matusis, Senior Lecturer in Marketing, who will be delivering the session today. Also joining us are Rifat and Navina, our brilliant student ambassadors who will be on hand to answer any questions that you have. Please pop those questions in the Q&A box during the allotted discussion breaks or at the end of the session. And again, delighted to welcome you today. Without further ado, I will hand over to Dr. Darren Matusis.
Thanks for the introduction. So I've identified 4 questions which I think you might be interested in discussing with me and the student ambassadors. And what I'd like us to do is work through each of these 4 questions in order, and I will give a very short overview with my perspective on each of these. And after each one, we'll have a moment where you can post questions to the chat, and I will try and answer those questions. If we stay to the agenda, we'll get through this quite efficiently and have time at the end for all of those questions which I didn't think to answer for you. Okay? So the obvious first question in this session is, why would anybody want to study marketing and management? And for many students, I guess the most visible aspect of marketing is advertising and other forms of marketing communication, including that on social media. And that's what often draws students to the topic. And of course, seeking to understand what makes effective advertising is an interesting and valuable area of study. But the study of marketing is much broader, and it's because of that breadth that it makes for what I think is a great undergraduate education. Why, you might ask? So in order to be a good marketer, we need to understand the psychology of individuals and collective decision-making of organizations, so we can understand how they make their buying decisions. We need to understand the political, economic, social, technological, legal, and ecological context in which buyers and sellers interact. We need to develop skills at reading widely and identifying which parts of what we read are central to our current interests and problems. We need to develop skills at analyzing and evaluating competing explanations of the world and choosing between them, or perhaps even developing our own unique explanations. And we need to develop skills at analyzing data and drawing inferences from that data. All of those skills which you need in order to be good marketers, you also need to more generally understand the world around you and make good decisions for yourself, for your families, for your communities, and importantly at the ballot box on election days. So marketing and management studies therefore give you an opportunity to develop that broad range of skills. And for me, the measure of a good undergraduate education is one that's useful to your life, even if you decide not to go into the subject area. And I'm confident that if you study marketing and management, one, you'll develop the skills to be a good marketer, but also if you decide not to go into marketing, all of the skills that you have learned along the way will be useful to whatever you choose to do. So with that little introduction, and admittedly quite rapid, we'll offer a few moments for questions about the subject matter of university studies in marketing and management. Pop your questions in the chat box. I can't see a list of attendees, so I can't do a classroom technique and call for you to volunteer. So maybe along the way you'll think of questions and we can address them at the end. I'll move to then the second thing. Yep.
There's one question here. How many hours of studying will I have per week?
We get to this topic later. So if we can just table that question for how is university different to secondary school and college, I've already got a note on that.
Great, thank you.
So then just a short moment. Often at open days, and that was the case when I was looking at what to study 30 years ago as an undergraduate, we were given guest lectures or lectures. And I didn't want to give a lecture today. And you might be curious to know why. And the way I look at this is lectures were ways to transmit information when people were not literate, they couldn't read or write, or if they were literate, they did not have access to the relevant books. So somebody who had the book and read the book would effectively summarize the book to their audience of students or novices or apprentices. Now, of course, and this has evolved considerably since I was an undergraduate. Now, of course, through the internet and all sorts of online resources, you have access to all the information that you can imagine. And importantly, you can read it faster than anybody can talk. So reading is a much more efficient way to acquire knowledge. On the other hand, discussions with questions and answers, problems and group activities like we have in classes are good for doing what reading and lectures can't do very well. And that's getting us to think more deeply about ideas, practice applying them, analyze them, and evaluate them. So in today's session, I wanted to give that chance for question and answer because that forces you to think more deeply about this really important decision that you have to make about what to study and where starting next year. So that's why there's no lecture. And that provides us to a useful segue into a discussion about the difference between secondary school and college and university. And at school and college, you're used to this idea of acquiring knowledge. And you're presented with a range of ideas that you have to memorize and reproduce in your various assessments. And you are introduced to the idea of applying and analyzing and evaluating that knowledge, but only in a relatively cursory way. At university, our key responsibility is to help you develop your skills at applying, analyzing, and evaluating ideas. Because by the time you get to university, we know you're good at acquiring knowledge. You're not so good at applying it, analyzing it, and evaluating it, and that's where our job to help you is. So the difference between school and university is that one, and coming to that question about teaching hours and study hours, you have at university lots more independent learning time where you acquire knowledge from textbooks and journal articles. You work by yourself on that, guided by us, having chosen what is good material and relevant material for you to study. Then we set you lots of activities where you get to practice working with that knowledge. And we encourage you to work in study groups to discuss the knowledge you've acquired and to discuss how you're working through those activities and practicing applying the knowledge, analyzing it, and evaluating it. And then compared to school and college, you have a relatively small number of classes where we come together to practice working with the knowledge, to improve our skills at applying it, analyzing it, and then evaluating it, where you build your skills at working with others, and where you get input and guidance from your lecturers and tutors. And in the social sciences, like business and marketing, there is there is typically relatively few classes. 8 hours a week of classes is normal. But the expectation is that you treat this as a full-time job, that you should be working 35 to 40 hours a week, just like people in full-time jobs. And the university has a credit framework, and so there is an expectation over the course of a year an undergraduate will spend 1,200 hours studying in a mixture of independent study, working with their classmates, and coming to classes. So I hope that answers the questions about the time. So we have some questions that have come up around this topic. is maths a big component of the course? Could you explain a little bit more about the modules like accounting for business and applied economics? So accounting and economics are really good examples of the kinds of courses that everybody who graduates with a business degree, no matter what the speciality, needs to understand. And economics, if you like, is the logic of business decision making. And that logic seeps its way into all sorts of other disciplines, including marketing. So it's really important that students study economics and they get to understand the logic of economic decision making. They're able to understand the government policies a little bit better, and they're able to use that logic for making decisions within their own firms and other organizations. Accounting, if you like, is the language of business. That once you go past entry-level jobs in marketing and management more generally, you understand the organization and how it interacts with the world through accounting data. Because you no longer have direct contact with your customers, for instance. So you understand them in terms of the total sales by regions, the sales per salesperson, and changes in those kinds of figures, the profit level of different product lines, etc. So we require you to study that material because it's so fundamental to understanding how any organization works. So then Shauna has a question here. How much group work activity will be involved? This varies a bit between module to module, and it's important to us that you have practice at working in groups because when you get into the workplace, in order to achieve anything of any size or scale, you will have to work with others. So some of us in modules like mine, I encourage you to work in groups, but I don't assess how you work in groups in any formal way. But you get lots of encouragement and lots of practice to work in groups. In other modules, you get formally assessed in your group work. And across the whole program, we make sure there's a reasonable balance of the different kinds of assessment methods as a way of encouraging you to build the right balance of skills that you need for life afterwards. And then Angel asks a question, I hope I've pronounced the name correctly. Is maths a big component of the course? As part of the earlier question, you have to do some maths in first year, some statistics, because no marketer can hope to understand and make good decisions about, for instance, the effectiveness of an advertising campaign without recourse to basic understanding of statistics. But it's statistics and not maths, as you might understand it. So it's again another one of those subjects that is important to the practice of marketing, but also understanding the world more generally. And I'm sure you're all regularly looking at the data presented about coronavirus as a way of understanding what's happening with that. And the better your understanding of statistics, the better you are able to make good judgments about what the data means. Then Vittoria asks, is it necessary to be a creative person? And my response to this is no. Marketing, first and foremost, like most university studies, is about building our technical competence. And we do some studies of creativity, and we encourage you to be creative. But creativity is working out where the gaps are and how to fill them in what we already know. And so by studying diligently and rigorously and developing your critical skills as a technical specialist, you also automatically become creative because you see those gaps in existing knowledge. Working out ways to fill them is a creative exercise. And I don't see this as something that is innate to an individual, but it's developed through study and practice. And then Anna has a question about when will we be assessed, and students, especially coming out of secondary school and college, often get obsessed by assessment, and I want everybody to be much more relaxed about it. So in my view, being good at the assessment task is a natural consequence of having studied well, and we help you to study well. And my colleagues and I work really hard to create assessment exercises that are good both tests and incentives to study the material that we've identified as important. So you will be assessed throughout the year, and you'll be assessed in different ways as befits the modules you're studying. And then there's a series of other questions here. These are very good questions. Does the school have guest speakers and networking opportunities? Yes, of course. My colleagues who organize this do a fantastic job at getting in guest speakers and providing online, or when conditions allow it in the future, on campus networking opportunities. And related to that was a question about work placements and opportunities for internships. And both within the school and centrally within the university, we have a great team who works on those placements and internships. And we also have a series of internal projects where managers throughout the university draw on students to do research projects, in particular related to the running of the university. And they're quite good because they give students a chance to use their disciplinary knowledge, to interact with students in other parts of the university, and practice working on real business problems in a safe working environment where the client, if you like, is very understanding that this is a student working on their first consultancy projects. And then Vittoria asks, how will the relationships with professors be? We're here to guide you through each of our special subjects. You won't have the same kind of relationship that you have with your teachers at school. You won't know the professors quite as well as you get to know your teachers. But you also have a much more equal relationship in a sense, because we assume that you're adults, not kids anymore, and that you are responsible. So we rely and expect you to come to us when you're struggling or wish to celebrate your progress on the material. And that's part of that important shift from being a child to being an adult. And we expect you to have much more open and honest conversations with us about the material and about how you're working through it. So that's quite a bit of a change from school. Some of your professors or tutors, lecturers, like me, who are program directors, you'll get to know quite well because we will work together for the 3 years of your program. Others you will see just for a series of lectures, and you will know them through the material they ask you to study. I hope that answers the questions. So we've just got a couple of more minutes, and I want to now pick up on the coronavirus issue, because that also helps address some of the questions I've seen in the chat about how we work and so on. And the student ambassadors might give quite a different answer to this question. I think it's important that you hear from both of us. From my perspective as an academic, shepherding students through 3 years of study around marketing and management, coronavirus doesn't affect us at all. We are almost exclusively working online at the moment, but the students are learning the same material and learning to work with the same material in the same kinds of ways. So the expectations for their learning and their capacity to learn have not changed. And I'm seeing students have the same kinds of engagements with their peers and tutors. The first year students who are coming to me and asking me questions are asking me exactly the same kinds of questions that the first year students asked me last year. The students that are coming to me and saying, I'm struggling with this adaptation to university are having exactly the same struggles as students last year. I am giving the same advice, and they're coming back to me and saying the advice worked, thank you. So in that sense, in terms of the fundamental reason why you come to university, to build your intellect, coronavirus doesn't change anything. My colleagues and I have spent our whole summers tweaking our modules, re-engineering our teaching plans to make sure that you can learn the same material and learn to work with the same material in the same ways. Of course, there are some differences. Everybody has had to learn new skills using new online platforms like the one we're on now, but your generation of student is remarkably adept at working online. And if you ask your parents or grandparents how the transition would have been 30 or more years ago, they would have had a much bigger struggle. And then the other very interesting thing is these new online platforms that we're using allow us to work together in ways that simply aren't possible in socially distanced classrooms. So for instance, as the student ambassadors will tell you, I love getting my students to work around big sheets of paper and draw models of the theories that they're studying that explain biobehavior, for example. And an important part of a classroom seminar is 3 or 4 students working together on that large sheet of paper and testing each other and creating a new model that, using their reading and their personal experiences, better explains how consumers buy, for example. That we can't do in a classroom now. But we can do it online using Teams or Zoom or Blackboard. My students are able to work around a virtual document and do the same kinds of exercise, have the same conversations and develop the same skills. And then we'll have this one last question because that humanizes it slightly before going into more free chat. What do you teach? Angel asks, and could you please tell us a bit more about a recent module you teach? So if you join marketing and management, you're stuck with me in first year, first semester for your compulsory marketing module. And my job is to give you a broad overview of the whole of the marketing discipline so that as you go on to your specialist marketing subjects in second and third year, you know where everything fits and you have a framework for making sense of it. And the way I do this is by stepping students through the marketing management process. And that's the process that marketers use in order to identify, create, and then promote a solution to consumers or organizations' problems. And so the structure of that module is very straightforward. First, we study a little bit of biobehavior to understand what motivates people and organizations to buy. Then we study what we call segmentation, because there are too many consumers with too many different needs and wants for us to handle at once. So we need to work out how to put them into manageable size groups. And then we study how we create a market offering for them by manipulating a very simple 4Ps model where we think about the physical product, how the distribution channel works, how we choose a price, and how we choose some communication. So that's the marketing management process. And of course, we can't do this out of thin air, so we study a little bit of marketing research, and we study a little bit of marketing ethics to make sure we make responsible decisions along the way. And so what that does is it gives every student a relatively straightforward framework where they can understand the marketing process. And then in second and third year, where they go on to study services marketing and international marketing, organizational buying, and so on, they know where that fits in this simple process. So we've now got a couple of minutes for free chat questions. I hope I've managed to answer most of the questions that came along, and might be useful for the student ambassadors to pop in with any different perspectives they have, because they will, on some of these topics, have a very different experience being on the other side of the chalkboard, so to speak. So any questions about the material I've covered, or broader material related to the study of marketing and management? Okay, so Yusuf has an admissions question. Yes. Yes.
Oh,
yes.
Sorry.
So
for any admissions-related questions, could you please email your question to sbminquiries@qmul.ac.uk, and then we can speak to you about your current situation in depth?
Yeah, and I think the general answer is a mix of A-levels and B.Techs is usually okay, but follow Shauna's advice and get in touch where you can discuss your specific subject choices. So Victoria is asking, will we be able to work in advertising? Yes. The advertising industry is very pluralistic. It takes people who have studied all sorts of different things. But the advantage of having studied a marketing degree is you develop some relevant technical skills, such as those in statistics. You're familiar with some of the language and frameworks that will be used in the industry. And along the way, you get practice working at it the way that students who've studied in other disciplines won't have. So again, we're very pluralistic about what A-level and B.Tech subjects and IB students have taken. We have some prerequisites around English and maths at GCSE level, but we teach assuming that nobody has studied in the discipline. So we have students coming in who've studied maths and physics, and we have students who are coming in who've studied English and literature and geography and so on. Everything starts on the assumption that you know nothing about the subject. And if you have studied in the subject before, you're encouraged to forget it and start again, because we do things a bit differently at university. And Jehar asks a question about being a real estate agent, and basically anybody can become a real estate agent after taking the appropriate regulatory tests. But where business and management subjects, including marketing, help, is they build a set of knowledge and skills that may help make your real estate agent practice better. And you can imagine a real estate agent needs to identify what markets to focus on, whether to look at rental housing or buy-to-let landlords as target markets, etc., etc. They need to think carefully about how they spend their promotion budgets to get both buyers and sellers or renters and landlords into their business and so on. And you could use that idea as a virtual case study as you work through. And Victoria is asking about international students. I said, no, UK universities, including Queen Mary, have a really, really, really comprehensive understanding of what different qualifications in different countries are like. And we're good at making judgments about which students are going to be able to prosper and thrive on the course. So it's no easier or harder for an international student to be accepted. The only additional requirement is, of course, that international students, if they haven't taken their high school qualifications in English, must demonstrate appropriate levels of English. So I think that brings us to time to move to the other session. Is that right, Shauna?
Yes, that is right. Thank you all for joining us today. If there are any questions that you haven't had answered, please email them to sbminquiries@qmul.ac.uk, and we will be happy to answer those for you. There is the alumni student and academic talk going on at the moment, which I will post in the chat for you to follow and view, and you can also ask questions there as well. Thank you, Darren and Navina, so much for your time today. Darren, if you wanted to say any last words?
No, thank you very much for your great questions, and good luck with your decisions. Get in touch with SBM Inquiries if you have more questions that we haven't managed to answer.
Thank you all. Take care.